Welcome to part 3 of the DataFlux video series, 3 Critical Steps to Improving Product Data Quality. I'm your host, Jim Harris, the blogger-in-chief at Obsessive Compulsive Data Quality. I'm also a regular contributor to the DataFlux Community of Experts blog, which will soon be relaunched as the Data Roundtable. This is a 4-part video series about improving product data quality, focusing on 3 critical steps: categorization, standardization, and matching. This video series is based on my DataFlux white paper, which is available for download at dataflux.com/knowledge center/DQ. This is the 3rd part of the series, which is focusing on the 2nd critical step, which is standardization. Back in part 2 of this series, we performed the categorization step, which was the process of assigning a category to each one of our product description records. These free-form product descriptions come from the Acme Foods Product Master Catalog. We also discussed in part 2 that the bane of product data quality is the fact that most of its attributes are buried within a free-form text field, such as the product descriptions that we're working with here. Our 20 records actually were split nicely into 2 separate categories of 10 records each, 10 belonging to the candy category and 10 belonging to the beverage category. As we also discussed in part 2, product hierarchies are usually broken down into categories, which helps us to divide and conquer the product data quality challenge. Plus, we also know from part 2 that subject matter expertise is usually divided along the lines of the product hierarchy. And by dividing and conquering the challenge, by splitting the product descriptions into separate categories, we can then route our categories to the specific standardization processes which will handle them. This is often necessary because some of the contents of the free-form description field can take on a very different context within a different category. So let's start by looking at the candy category. So our candy SMEs, our candy subject matter experts, are helping us with the first part of standardization, which is the creation of a new brand field. So they have gone through the candy category and helped us to identify the parts of the product description that relate to the 2 brand names that are represented by these 10 records. E-hard-emoticon MC squared, which is short for Everybody Loves Milk Chocolate Squared, is the chocolate candy bar. And then we have Sugar Extreme, which is the sugar chewing gum. So the SMEs have highlighted for us which of the words in the free-form description field belong as part of the brand field that we need to create. So the first step that we're going to do in this 2-step process is to pull out of the product description those words that were highlighted by our SMEs. So now we're starting to get better addressability to the actual contents of the product description field by pulling those values into a new brand field. This also makes it a lot easier for us to see the tremendous variations in the way that the brand names are being represented for this candy bar and this chewing gum. So here we have lots of different ways, either through abbreviations or spelled out or different word order challenges to the way that the brand name is being represented. So the second step that we're going to do now is to apply standard values to the brands that we just pulled out of the product description field. After we do this second step, we now can normalize the representation of our 2 brands according to what the SMEs have told us are the official brand names for these 2 products. So E-hard-emoticon MC squared and Sugar Extreme are the 2 official brand names for the 2 candy products that are within the candy category. Now, the reason that this is set up as 2 separate steps is not just conceptual, but because you often will want to do this in terms of the way that you design your data quality process. Just to back up for a moment, the reason why that's a good idea is because if you separate these 2 steps physically in terms of the way you design your process, you'll have the opportunity to assign different standards. Because even though we looked in step 2 that the official brand names for the 2 products we're working with, well, those are the official brand names when we're selling them perhaps in North America. Some other types of, if Acme Foods was an international organization, for example, we might have to apply different standards when we were selling in Europe or different parts of the world. So by having the 2-step process actually physically separate, not just logically separate, in the standardization and data quality process that we're developing, it'll allow us to be able to actually apply different standards so that when we got to step 2, we could apply a different set of standards if we wanted to have a different representation of the brand name field. So this has allowed us to start to get better control over what we have in terms of understanding the content of the product description. Let's continue on with the beverage category now. So let's assume that our beverage SMEs have helped us to perform branding in a way similar to what we saw perform in the candy category. And now here in beverage, we have broken out Sugar Water and Extreme Keiko as the two brand names of the two beverages we have here for our carbonated beverage and our chocolate energy drink. So now we're going to take a look at what's left of the product description field for the beverage brands, and the SMEs are helping us to highlight the contents of the description that is appropriate for new unit fields that we're going to be creating once again in a two-step process. So what we have highlighted here are aspects of what are going to be several different unit fields that we're going to create in order to again bring more order to the chaos of the product description. So in part one, we're going to pull those highlighted words into, in this case, 4 new unit fields. So we have unit count, unit size, unit measure, and unit type. So the unit count is the number of products that are being sold. So in the case of a 6-pack of aluminum cans of carbonated soft drink, that's the number of cans. So it's the individual units that we're selling. The unit size and the unit of measure go together. So the unit measure in this case is the weight or the fluid weight of the product that we're selling. And then the unit type is the container type. So in this case, we have aluminum cans and plastic bottles. So by having this addressability now for the unit information, we now have very little information actually left in the original product description field. So similar to what we had talked about in the previous section, it's a good thing for this to be, again, a two-step process, not just logically, but physically, because now we can decide what set of standards we want to apply to the values that are in the new unit fields we have just created. So we'll do that in our second step, where we'll go through, and in this case, we're going to use numeric representations for the unit count and unit size. We're going to standardize on fluid ounces and liters as the units of measure. And for the unit type, can and bottle are being used as the standard values for aluminum can and plastic bottle, respectively. Some additional standardization is also being reflected on this slide, where the remaining contents of the product description have also been further standardized into a representation of carbonated soft drink for Sugar Water and chocolate energy drink for Extreme Keiko. So now we have a very structured and fully standardized representation of the beverages. And the additional thing we also have done is we've filled in the missing unit counts by populating them with a default value of 1. So if I just back up again one slide, so we had first separated out the contents of the description field into the 4 new unit fields, and we had some variety for what was left in the product description field, which was normalized by applying standardized values again in part 2. But also the other thing here is we have some missing unit counts for some of the beverages, and that was the other thing that was filled in when we get to step 2. In addition to standardizing the unit fields, we filled in those missing values in the unit counts and standardized the representation of product description. So after we finish standardization for both the candy and the beverage category, this is what we would end up having our records look like. So we started out with this free-form description field, which was very difficult for us to see, exactly what we had for available input data, different brands, and different units and different product descriptions. And now we've been able to create this highly standardized structure where we have our products separated by category, separated by brand, and we have addressability to the different components of the unit information apart from the formal product description. And now we have a standardized structure that we can use for, among other things, matching, which will be the subject of the 4th and final part of this series. So in part 4, we're going to take a look at duplicate identification. Back in part 1 of the series, we talked about 6 duplicate records for the candy bar product, and those are a lot easier to spot after we have a fully standardized record. And we're also going to talk about how we're going to consolidate those duplicates down into a single representation. So that will be the subject of part 4 of this series, so please stay tuned for the 4th and final part of this video series.